This is probably one of the most challenging lectures I can give because the idea is so unbelievably complex. I've taught existentialism a lot over the last few years, especially in regard to literature and especially in regard to this webcomic. Existentialism, or at least my conception of existentialism, is primarily founded from Jean-Paul Sartre. If you guys ever get the chance to try to read Jean-Paul Sartre, good luck. He's my favorite philosopher, but man, he is not an easy read. Sartre, it is really hard to explain Sartre in a way that you can condense him into a video. I've probably read almost everything the guy's ever written, and almost all of it is completely incomprehensible until you've read it like 5 or 6 times. And Being in Nothingness was like over 1,000 pages long, so it's pretty dense. But Sartre was a French philosopher. He's one of the main figures of French existentialism, and he really came out of the climate of World War II. He was in the resistance movement World War II, and one of the things that really informed his philosophy was after World War II, you had the Nuremberg Trials. I know this is really weird coming because we're going to be looking at a comic about high school drama and cats, but you'll be shocked at how much this actually comes into play. After World War II, with the Nuremberg Trials, one of the things that you constantly heard over and over again was Nazi sympathizers, Nazi officials, when interrogated about their involvement in particular atrocities, they would constantly say something to the effect of, "I was following orders. It's not my fault. What happened? I did what I had to do because I didn't want to get killed for disobeying." Sartre and many other philosophers like him really reacted to this. I'm going to have to pick this up for a minute because I'm getting sick of sitting in that chair. Sartre reacted to this with understandable rage. And what he surmised with this was that you can't escape your moral responsibility that way. You have to confront the decisions that you made in your moment. And that ultimately, your identity as a person, your very essence, is dependent upon the actions that you take and the decisions that you make. So, Sartre begins a very complicated process here through philosophy, where he attempts to completely destroy any hold that the state or any type of ideological structure. He attempts to destroy any hold that can have on a person. That took him to some pretty strange places. Now, probably one of the most common, or at least the most powerful examples of this is in what some people would term his nihilism. That's a big word, and let me explain. Sartre was what I call a high atheist. He believed that there is absolutely nothing up there. And everything, every conception of value that we have is created by us. It is a mental action. Value, essence, does not precede existence. Existence precedes essence. In this case, one of the easier ways to access this conversation is that you don't really have a soul. You are nothing until you make yourself. You have no essence until you have chosen to do things, until you are an acting body. Now, this is a really tough philosophy because it already shuts a lot of people out with its atheism. But what you'll find is that when you start looking at ethics and when you start looking at your life from the spectrum of there is no meaning anywhere, you start to notice some very interesting things about the way that people conceive of themselves and the way people perceive their responsibility and how they make decisions. Because in this philosophy of absolute complete nothingness, Sartre gives the ability to create meaning to man. Well, woman too. Sorry, sometimes I have that, gender discriminatory language. But Sartre gives that power to human beings. The only value that exists is what you create, but the creation of that value, of that meaning, has value, has legitimacy, and it's the only legitimacy. So, if the only value that exists in the universe is what you create, you're responsible for for that value. You're responsible for the things that you do. Now, let me give you a few terms to make this a little bit more actionable, because existentialism, it's a weird theory, and it can be a little difficult to think of it in literary terms, but it's my absolute favorite. When we start talking about the psychology of existentialism, you get some very, very interesting terms and some very repetitive ideas that come up almost all the time. The first, and one of my favorites, is dread. We all have an understanding of dread as extreme fear. For Sartre, and philosophers do this all the time, and they can get away with it. Sartre introduced, he actually kind of played off of this with Kierkegaard. Oh gosh, I gotta avoid the tangents. It doesn't work well in a video. Dread is something very specific, and it's hard to describe sometimes. Dread is when you encounter or you sense the ultimate weight of your responsibility bearing down upon you. That causes dread. Coming up with an example of this is actually quite hard. If you've ever faced a decision where you could not commit one way or the other, everything was like a negative outcome, and you were struggling between what you wanted and what you wanted to do for other people, and you were just completely stuck in this moment where you had to make a decision, and pretty much it was just going to be bad. You ever faced something like that before? Whether it's like, gosh, for me, buying a new car. For some people, do I propose to this woman I've been dating? Do I say yes to this loser who's proposing to me? These can be very, very kind of complicated and mentally anguishing things as you confront them. And part of the reason Sartre argues that this is the case is because in this moment you can't simply make a decision based on what other people tell you to do. You have to decide between what's best for you and the expectations of others. It's in moments like that when dread kind of sits upon us, where it's like you get this brief glimpse into the fact that there is absolutely no meaning to any of this. My decisions are kind of arbitrary. I have no idea what to do. And the thing that you're afraid of, the thing that you're dreading, is the fact that you are responsible for the decision that you make. It's especially bad when you know no matter what you do, somebody's going to be angry at you. That is an example of dread.